must say it's kind of odd, maybe funny to talk about Dart on the backend on the mobile meetup, and even more to realize that only a third of you does something with Flutter. So hopefully you're gonna enjoy this, and also you will learn a little bit more about Flutter, but it's gonna be skewed towards Dart itself. But I think it's kind of empowering and interesting to see, like myself being a mobile developer mostly, Xamarin, React Native, Flutter, stuff like that. And I just had to develop some backend apps. So it was interesting to see how Dart let me do this. But before we dive into the topic itself, again, typical stuff as always. I'm Dominik, super happy to be here with you. First time in Riga. Really enjoy the city so far. I'm gonna sightsee tomorrow. Looks so cozy and nice to just walk around. At the moment, I'm building an app, the product called Visible. This is an app for people that struggle with long COVID and chronic fatigue syndrome and some other chronic illnesses. And we're trying to help people with this condition to just live a better life. And I also try to write something on my blog and my newsletter. So if you feel like it, feel free to check it out. So when it comes to backend development from the mobile developer point of view, it's you tend to get some assumptions that are not always true. Like when you're developing for mobile, you usually just have a single person kind of using the app. You only focus on that. Of course, you integrate with the backend, so you need to understand how the backend works. But the backend development is vastly different from front-end development, and the distance between mobile development and backend development is even higher than between just a web front-end. But I mean, it's still kind of compelling to try to transfer your mobile development skills to build some backends. The great thing about Flutter, which uses Dart as its language, is that Dart can also be used to build backends. And finally, like even on this little poster here, there is a thing called Vapor. And from what I can tell, Vapor is a Swift framework for backends. I don't know if anybody used Vapor before. No, not even iOS engineers that raised their hands before. But it's kind of interesting to see that many of these mobile-first frameworks or languages try to kind of take a piece of cake from the backend side. So this is kind of what Dart also provides. And if you think about it, Dart originated from the backend world. Like like a few years ago, like 2 years before Flutter beta, one of the biggest companies using Dart in Warsaw was actually just building backend stuff. So it was really interesting to see that this transition in last few years, that Flutter is like kind of taken Dart as its main kind of language. Dart is adapting to Flutter, not the other way around. And at Visible, where we build this product, we only have 2 mobile engineers, and we're mobile first. And we, at some point, just had to build some backends. So the first thing that we tried was kind of obvious and simple. We just tried to use Cloud Functions in TypeScript. That was pretty fast. We get going in a few days, and we're able to just have simple endpoints, simple APIs. However, and also we have some processing in Python because we collect a lot of data from our users. And once we had to scale up. At the moment, we have 20,000 monthly users, which for me personally, for such a small team, is kind of exciting. But like once we kind of got into this a little bit bigger scale, we realized that it's getting a little bit out of hand, kind of switching between TypeScript and Dart, and maintaining the same models into languages. Even with some kind of code generation, it became quite tricky. And we looked into some ways of using Dart as our API for the mobile app. There was a lot of context switching and some conflicts between models. So for instance, on the backend, on the database, we defined some field as a nullable, then it was not nullable in TypeScript, and then again nullable in Dart, and it was kind of getting out of hand. So we looked into possible solutions, and that was my duty just to check out. And today I'm going to share some insights. So if you are in the same situation, or maybe you want to just build a simple backend for the mobile app, or maybe try to integrate with hyped ChatGPT or any other AI solution out there right now, Dart can also do that. So let's start with some possible solutions, and let's start for like the obvious one, or like the oldest one, which is called Shelf. Shelf is a library that was developed back in the day before Flutter to build the backend in Dart, and it's just a simple library that allows you to create really basic requests handler and servers. It supports things like middleware, so you can check for the authentication, do some kind of pre-processing of the requests. The implementation is super simple. If you have some endpoint, let's say you serve it on your local host or on your server, you just create handlers using very, very simple syntax. So in like 20 lines, 15 lines of code, even less, you can have a simple hello world, and you can serve it from anything, pretty simple. So this responds for every request with just the request name, and you can of course add more things on top of that. However, the problem with Shelf is that there's no proper documentation. Like, the thing has more than 5 years, and unless you look into the examples, you don't know how to use that. So not many people kind of take it as their first tool to build the backend solution. Then the other thing, on the opposite spectrum of, I would say, accessibility and ease of use, is ServerPod. So ServerPod is just a kind of very nice first-class solution that lets you build Dart backends. It's a commercial one. I used it like just briefly. It's fun and nice, but at the same time, the overhead of just setting up a third-party account and stuff like that was beyond what I wanted to do. I just wanted to have something that I can locally develop, I can deploy to anywhere, and don't tie to any kind of provider, but they are great. They have really nice branding, really cool, with, like, I think it reminds me of Rive, which is the animation library for Flutter, and not only. So if you look for something that's easy to use out of the box, then ServerPod could be one of that. And then, as you recall, we used Cloud Functions in TypeScript. And for many, many months, developers asked Google whether Dart is going to be supported in Cloud Functions. So at the moment, you can use TypeScript or JavaScript, and there have been some ways to use Dart with Cloud Functions. So for instance, you could just transpile Dart to JS and then just run this as your Cloud Functions. And recently, Google unveiled, but it's still kind of hidden, not officially endorsed, a library called Functions Framework for Dart. And this is a really nice wrapper, or like a helper, that lets you build things that are very similar to Cloud Function and host them on App Engine. If you dive deeper into how Cloud Functions work, they are actually kind of App Engine, or like Google Cloud's App Engine services, but like just wrapped with much nicer package and having a bit more observability and ability to kind of deploy using different APIs and just manage through the user interface. And App Engine is a underlying tool for many Google services that run on Google Cloud. And you can potentially use this, and I use that, and this is really, really cool, because when I open my Cloud Function in TypeScript and then open my Dart implementation of that on the other side, it was looking almost exactly the same, just in a different language, and I could potentially easily port our backend from TypeScript to Dart. The only issue is actually that you have to run it on App Engine, and you have to deal with things like scaling manually, the stuff, maybe not manually, but you have to define things like how the endpoint scales, to what kind of region you need to deploy it. Things like some of the libraries are not supported in Dart just yet, so you have to find some replacements. But other than that, you can potentially, again, with just a very simple Dart function, that handles your request, you can just have a simple hello world, and of course you can build up on top of that much more complex solutions. Of course, like things like in Cloud Functions, you can do PubSub, which is like sending messages that other functions can respond to. You don't have it with Dart functions framework for Dart because it doesn't support PubSub out of the box. So for us, where we use a lot of PubSub and kind of microservices or like small functions that handle some distributed requests, it was much more difficult. So we just passed it for now. But the deployment is super simple. Once you have your project, you just run gcloud run deploy, select the project, select the some of the properties, and in a few seconds you have your Dart endpoint running on Google Cloud, and it works almost exactly the same as Cloud Functions. Of course, with some of the caveats that I mentioned before, and also from the mobile app side, you cannot use Firebase Functions SDK. You have to use just typical RESTful calls to your endpoint. So that's the catch. And the thing that I mentioned at the beginning of this chapter was that Google does not endorse it. So it's not like an official Google product. But again, this is not an insider knowledge, but it seems that it's going to be endorsed soon by Google in a way that they will not support, at least that's my guess, they will not support Dart in Cloud Functions. They will just say, if you want to use Dart on Google Cloud, you can use that. And this is one of the kind of lowest, like easiest approaches, easiest ways to have Dart on the backend. So that's like these three tools that I mentioned are kind of less popular at the moment, I would say. And whenever you look for ability to use Dart on the backend, the obvious choice pops up, and it is Dart Frog. And probably most of Flutter developers heard about it, but for people outside of the Flutter realm, let me tell you that this is kind of the best known kid on the block when it comes to Dart on the backend. And it's been fairly popular in last few months and getting more and more support. And if you'd like to describe it, you could say that this is like a minimalistic framework for backend in Dart. It's built on top of Shelf, but aside from that, it supports a couple of cool things. Like for instance, in Flutter, when you build your app, I don't know if it's supported in any way in Swift or Kotlin just yet, but like you have hot reload. So whenever you save your file, the changes automatically get pushed to the app, and you see the changes almost immediately with a fraction of a second on a good day. And the same thing actually applies also to Dart Frog, because it also supports hot reload. So this is pretty cool. If you implement your endpoint in Dart, you can just simply save your file, and within a few seconds, when you call this endpoint, it's refreshed. You can get similar experience with TypeScript, but at the same time, it's npm still needs to kind of recompile the function in order for you to reload the JS and have different different behavior. With Dart Frog, it's actually hot reloading the piece of code that changed, so it doesn't have to recompile everything, which is kind of cool, super easy to work with. The other thing, and this is like a choice, conventional choice, is that it uses file system routing. So you define your routes using files. So for instance, this file is called endpoint.dart. So you would have to call /endpoint to access that. You can have things like shelf supports, which is middleware, and there's also built-in dependency injection. Again, once you start building something more complex, it's you're gonna require some kind of dependency injection anyway. Getting started with that is super simple. I don't know if anybody knows the author of Dart Frog. There's one person raising hand, but I think if I would ask you, it would be cheating. Anybody knows who created that? So there's a guy called Felix Angelov, and he's like a really known person in the Flutter community, and he's created a lot of packages, and he also created Dart Frog. and the kind of common theme around his works is that there is a lot of some kind of CLIs around this. So there is also a CLI, command line interface for Dart Frog. So you can just use the CLI and it manages your Dart Frog server. It manages your Dart Frog server and deployment and building and stuff like that, which is super cool because you just need one tool to build and deploy your server. There is like this debugger and continuous mode, watch mode of the CLI, which is super convenient. As mentioned before, routes are file-based. So if you want to have your route, you need to create just index.dart file in a specified directory. So in this particular case, when you call your just your main endpoint, it's gonna call index.dart. If you would create a named file, it would you could just call it by appending this behind the URL. Super simple. Again, 4 lines of code, 6 including comments and new lines. So pretty cool, super easy to start. And that's something that I chose for today's demo. That's going to be at the end. And I hope that you're going to enjoy. Another thing that we heavily rely on at Visible is WebSockets and real-time connection. And when selecting a tool for what we want to potentially in the future use as our Dart replacement, we also needed to have WebSocket support. And what is pretty cool about Dart Frog, there's a package for that, and you can have WebSocket support almost instantaneously. And to use WebSockets, instead of just responding with response in your request, you respond with a WebSocket handler, and this handler is going to manage your WebSocket connection. So it's going to notify you whenever anybody connects to the WebSocket, whenever somebody disconnects, and also will let you know about any incoming messages. And you will use this handler also to send messages across the WebSocket. Super fun. And again, the API is extremely simple, and compared to just building the WebSocket handler on your own, it's like 3 times shorter, 5 times shorter, which is super convenient. And you can have even type safety with that if you define your models in a proper way. Another thing, and this is the moment where we try to bind or like connect mobile development and backend development, because until this point, most of the things that I mentioned were purely backend concepts. So for me as a mobile developer, I don't have to deal with them most of the time. But in Flutter, one of the most popular design patterns, state management techniques, libraries is block or Flutter block. And this is essentially a state machine that uses streams as its inputs and outputs. So this is kind of specific to Flutter, but at the same time, it's also present in other environments, other languages. And with block, you have to kind of add event, process this event, and then block emits a state. And it would be useful to bring this skill or bring this mode of operation also to the backend, especially if you consider your WebSocket messages to be your events and your outputs to be your states of your block. So you can potentially just try to take this concept from your mobile app and apply it to the backend. And there is a library for that as well, broadcast block. And this is a block that uses a WebSocket handler to process incoming messages as events and emit outgoing states as messages on the WebSocket, which is kind of cool, because what I wanted to do as a demo was to kind of have some kind of simple game when there is a game state, game world, and this world is a state of the game, state of the server, repeating message on the WebSocket. So this is what we're gonna use. In this particular example, we have our world block, and this is gonna handle our, or like manage our state of the game. And there's a couple of things here, like whenever player joins, whenever player is removed, whenever player gets updated, like adding a name or stuff like that. And each message that's gonna enter the WebSocket is going to be an event to this block, and the block is going to handle that and then emit a new state in response to that. And another thing that is kind of cool with Dartfrog, and mostly all of the Dart libraries, is that once you define some of the models, let's say on your mobile app, it's pretty easy, almost illegally easy, to share these models with your backend. So as I mentioned before, we had to struggle with kind of transferring TypeScript models to Dart and Dart models to TypeScript. And the cool thing about using just Dartfrog is that you can just use the same file, use the same model, both for the backend and the mobile app. And in this particular example, I just have my game models package. It needs to be kept under the Dartfrog directory, because Dartfrog gets packaged as a Docker container, so everything needs to be self-contained. But all the models that I have, player, world, game, events to the game, actions, stuff like that, can be shared between the backend and the mobile, which is super cool. And if you kind of think about it, if you can just share your models across these two environments, it's just going to reduce the overhead of all the API generation entirely. And the cool thing about Dartfrog is that once you define your models, you can even create your API client calls. So if you use, I don't know, I think on Android you use Dagger, right? Or something like that to do the request. In Flutter, use HTTP or DO, and Dartfrog can generate the request for you easily, so that you don't even have to deal with manually writing your API requests. All right. So knowing all of that, the implementation of our WebSocket handler is going to be super simple. In this particular case, and whenever somebody joins the game, whenever somebody connects to the WebSocket, we're going to add them to our world block. So we can see that here we're just accessing the world block and subscribe to it, and then add the event called world player added. And we have the sync for the channel, where we just gonna emit the current state of the block. Then whenever this stream emits a new event, which is whenever we get any kind of message from the mobile app, we're gonna add this as a event to the block. And whenever player disconnects, we're gonna add a world player removed, which means it's gonna remove the player from the state. And once you deploy it, even locally on your local host, you're gonna see in your Postman that whenever a player joins, you see them in the world state. So here you can see a JSON that describes the state and the position of our player in the world. And you can just add any kind of message to the WebSocket that game supports. So in this particular case, world player updated, and then once you have it, you will see the change immediately emitted by the WebSocket through the world block. All right, so we're going to change the position here and send the message through the WebSocket, and immediately after, it's going to be emitted by the world block. So this player position changed to 0, 0. So this was the kind of backend part of that. And then on the app side, it's going to be super simple as well. So you can use the WebSocket client library, which is like you have the WebSocket handler and WebSocket client. These are like two sides of the same coin. And you can just use this to send any kind of messages. So this is, let's say, part of code that's in your mobile app. And the greatest thing here is that you can just use exactly the same classes, exactly the same models when dealing with your backend API. And of course, I'm using WebSockets here, but you can use this also for your RESTful endpoints. You can use this for any kind of backend interactions. And it just saves so much time. And as a mobile developer, I think there is nothing easier than that. I kind of feel that it's like empowering even too much sometimes. All right. Let's have a short demo right now. And I'm going to need you to take out your phones because we're going to scan a little QR code. I know that QR codes are pretty common tonight. And this time, I actually need you to scan this. I'm going to check in a sec if it actually works. But it should. So this is going to be a QR code here. Kind of funny. I'm going to try to scan it as well. Yep. And you should see a game screen. Feel free to join. I hope it's going to connect. I'm on my LTE. Let me know if you cannot connect, if it fails to connect, because sometimes I noticed that on LTE it fails to connect. I'm going to try to connect. Connecting, didn't connect. Just give me a sec. I think it has some issues on this Wi-Fi on all this LTE. Sorry. Crap. I can see that I need to restart my instance. Connected? Yeah, amazing. Yeah, so there was a bit of a warm-up time. All right. So I'm going to try to show it here as well. Right, so if you join that, there's going to be a little game for you prepared. Amazing, I can see you top players. All right, so this is the game that you just saw me a part of that implement. And I mean, I don't know if I can promise any kind of awards, but probably there's going to be some beers or something. So if you haven't joined yet, here's a QR code again. And this is a super simple thing, but hopefully, like we can see that several people joined. Later on, I'm going to check. Yeah, 19 people joined. And this is a single instance Dart Frog server running on an app engine, deployed just before this talk, and it works just fine. And the more people join, the more dots there are. So if you join, you can just tap on them and try to win. Let's wait a couple more minutes, maybe to 7:15. And we're going to see who won. And then, so I can see that Kirill is actually leading here really seriously. But maybe somebody's going to beat him. Name, 38, yeah. And what is cool about this is that every one of you is getting WebSocket messages every second or so. That synchronize the world state, right? So for me, as a demo, this kind of works pretty well. Yeah, I can see that like at least 4 people try to compete. The Flutter Slayer is on the 5th place. And yeah, so the top 4 don't change as much as lower places. Let's have last like 30 seconds, and we're going to see who won. I mean, it's kind of obvious, unless Kirill disconnects. All right. All right, Kirill reached 100 points. I think it's the most that anybody ever scored in this game. I think that's going to be a wrap. Thank you so much. Let's get back to the slides. So let's quickly recap what we've just learned. So as you, like at the beginning, I went through some of the ways that you can use Dart on the backend, right? So shelf, server pod, functions framework for Dart, and finally Dart Frog. There are some other ways, but not as popular. And Dart Frog supports WebSockets almost out of the box, and I can highly recommend this. As you can see, 20-something people easily, so huge scale. We can easily deploy this to like a production of 20,000 users. For the Flutter side of things, it's like a mirrored library WebSocket client that allows you to easily connect to your WebSocket. Not necessarily Dart Frog. It can be any WebSocket connection. And finally, I have a question to you. Knowing all of that, and not necessarily being Flutter developer, right? Because only a third of you knows Flutter and uses Flutter. I wonder, like, would you use Dart on the backend, knowing like how easy it is to set up? Of course, there's like TypeScripts and JavaScripts and all the things in the like Pythons of the world, but like I must say that Dart feels closer to Kotlin and Swift than, for instance, JavaScript. So I wonder if this feels for you like a viable choice, because for us as Visible, having Dart developers mostly or Flutter developers, it seems like a really good choice. Of course, there are some costs, there are some drawbacks, but at the same time, I wonder like how you feel. Like, I don't want to ask you at the moment, but maybe you can just kind of clap if you would like to use Dart on the backend. Yeah, couple. All right. That's gonna be all. Thanks a lot. I hope that you enjoyed a little bit of kind of side topic from the mobile side. Like, it's not necessarily mobile topic, but I enjoyed this very much. I'm glad that the demo worked. The demo gods were with us tonight. So, you know, with a little hiccup, but all in all, I think it was quite fun. And congratulations, Kirill. Who is Kirill? Like, where is Kirill? Yeah, congrats. Yeah, congrats. Thank you very much again, and I hope to have some chats with you after the presentations about Flutter, about Dart, about anything else. Thank you so much.
So does anyone have any questions right now? Please raise your hand about Dart. Yep.
Yeah.
How would you handle if you use backend and front end using Dart? How would you handle the API versioning?
Oh, that's a tricky question. Yeah. Typically, like, it's the backend folks' kind of business to version the APIs. With Dart Frog, the challenge is like you have this file-based routing, so you have to kind of think about it from the beginning, that you kind of keep your API under V1, right? And then if you want to make breaking change, you keep it under V2. So this is kind of, on one hand, super simple because you just create a new folder, and this is like, and copy the stuff from your previous implementation. You can, of course, have your implementation of your endpoints as a library and version this library as well. So that could be one way. Yeah, I think I would start with like just package versioning. So probably the package version would be the version of my API, and this way I could just make sure that I follow semantic versioning, although semantic versioning is a lie, as many people say. But probably use something like that, where like the implementation of my API would be a package that's versioned, and I can just make sure that I include the version somewhere in the URL.
All right, then. Thank you very much, Dominik.
Thank you so much.
I think.
Oh my! Oh my God! It's an iPad. No,
this was an amazing talk, and I think as mobile developers, at some point in our career, we will meet with the thing when we need the backend. So I think this is something really cool to consider.
Thanks a lot.